Most of the time when we think about historical records, we assume they're reliable if they're old, if they come from official sources, if they're written down in important looking books. But what if I told you that nearly 2 centuries after Prophet Muhammad's death, the Islamic world faced a crisis of authenticity? Thousands upon thousands of stories about what the Prophet said and did were circulating across the empire. But many were fabrications, distortions, honest mistakes amplified through broken telephone chains spanning generations. In this ocean of claims, how could anyone know what was actually true? Enter a young scholar from Central Asia with a photographic memory and an obsession with truth. He would spend 16 years traveling 96,000 kilometers across the Islamic world, examining 600,000 hadith narrations to compile the most rigorously authenticated collection of prophetic traditions in history. His name was Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, and his work didn't just preserve Islamic history, it invented the science of historical authentication. Welcome to Muslim Biographies, where we uncover the forgotten giants of Islamic history whose contributions shaped our world. To understand al-Bukhari's revolutionary achievement, you first need to understand the problem he was solving. By the 9th century CE, roughly 200 years after the Prophet Muhammad's death, the Islamic Empire stretched from Spain to India. Cities thousands of kilometers apart, all claimed to possess authentic traditions about what the Prophet said, did, approved, or prohibited. These traditions, Hadith, were crucial. The Quran provided divine principles, but Hadith showed how those principles applied in daily life. How do you pray? The Prophet demonstrated it. How do you conduct business ethically? The Prophet modeled it. What's permissible and what's forbidden? The Prophet clarified it through his words and actions. But here's the problem. The Prophet himself never wrote a comprehensive hadith collection. His companions memorized his teachings and passed them orally to their students, who passed them to their students, who passed them to their students. By the 9th century, you had chains of transmission spanning 5 or 6 generations. And humans forget, they misremember, they embellish, they fabricate. Sometimes intentionally, political factions invented hadith to support their positions. Sometimes innocently, pious storytellers added details to make narratives more compelling. Sometimes accidentally, memories merged, contexts were lost, chains of transmission were confused. The result? An authentication crisis. Scholars estimated there were hundreds of thousands of hadith narrations circulating, but many were weak, questionable, or outright fabricated. Without a systematic method to separate authentic traditions from false ones, Islamic law and practice rested on unstable foundations. Several scholars had attempted hadith collections before al-Bukhari, but none had applied the level of systematic rigor, the methodological precision that the problem demanded. Until a boy from Bukhara decided to dedicate his life to solving it. Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari was born in 810 CE in the city of Bukhara, in what is now Uzbekistan, far from the traditional centers of Islamic learning like Medina, Mecca or Baghdad. His father, Ismail, was a respected hadith scholar who died when Muhammad was still young, leaving him to be raised by his mother. The defining moment of young al-Bukhari's childhood came when he went blind. His mother, devastated, prayed desperately for her son's sight to be restored. According to al-Bukhari's own account, his mother had a dream in which Prophet Abraham told her, "God has restored your son's sight because of your prayers." When she awoke and checked on her son, his sight had indeed returned. Whether you interpret this as miraculous intervention or spontaneous medical recovery, the experience left a profound mark on young al-Bukhari. He and his mother both saw it as divine intervention, a sign that he had been blessed for a purpose. That purpose became clear quickly. Al-Bukhari demonstrated an extraordinary, almost supernatural memory from childhood. There are accounts of him correcting his teacher's errors in hadith transmission while still a young student. When challenged, he would recite the correct chain of narrators and the precise wording, exposing mistakes his teachers had made. By age 10, he had memorized thousands of hadith. By age 16, he had memorized the works of major early hadith scholars. But al-Bukhari wasn't content with memorization alone. He wanted authentication. He wanted to know with rigorous certainty which traditions were genuine and which were not. At age 16, al-Bukhari made a decision that would define his life. He left Bukhara to pursue knowledge across the Islamic world. He would spend the next decades traveling, studying, investigating, and building what would become the most trusted Hadith collection in Islamic history. Al-Bukhari's quest was monumental. He traveled across the entire Islamic world, from his native Central Asia to Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and beyond. Historical sources suggest he covered approximately 96,000 kilometers over 16 years, mostly on foot or by animal. But this wasn't tourism. Al-Bukhari had a specific mission: to meet every major Hadith scholar alive, to examine their collections, to verify their chains of transmission, to cross-reference their narrations. He studied under more than 1,000 teachers. Some sources say over 1,080, each specializing in different Hadith traditions, different chains of transmission, different aspects of the Prophet's life. His method was exhaustive and systematic. When he encountered a Hadith narration, he didn't just accept it because a scholar claimed it was authentic. He investigated the chain of transmission. Who transmitted this narration? Who did they hear it from? Who did that person hear it from? Can we trace an unbroken chain back to a companion who directly witnessed or heard from the Prophet? He investigated the reliability of each narrator. Was this person known for truthfulness? Did they have a good memory? Were they careful in transmission or careless? Did they have biases that might distort their reporting? Were they even alive at the same time as the person they claimed to learn from? He examined the content itself. Does this narration contradict the Quran? Does it contradict other well-established hadith? Does it contradict known historical facts? Is the content itself coherent and consistent with the Prophet's character and teachings? Al-Bukhari developed what we would now call a multi-level verification system. He examined the biographical details of thousands of narrators, their birth and death dates, their character, their reputation among peers, their precision in transmission. He cross-referenced versions of the same hadith from different chains to identify variations. He investigated whether narrators in a chain actually met each other or were even contemporaries. This was forensic historical investigation centuries before modern historical methodology existed. Al-Bukhari's reputation for meticulous accuracy and phenomenal memory became legendary, sometimes attracting skeptics who wanted to test him. The most famous test occurred when al-Bukhari visited Baghdad, the intellectual capital of the Islamic world. A group of scholars decided to challenge him. They took 100 hadith narrations and deliberately scrambled them, mixing up chains of narration with wrong texts, attributing sayings to wrong chains, creating intentionally corrupted versions. Then they presented these fabricated hadith to al-Bukhari in a public gathering, asking him to verify them. Al-Bukhari listened to each one, and for every single one of the 100 fabricated hadith, he responded, "I don't know this one." The scholars were disappointed, thinking al-Bukhari had failed the test. But then al-Bukhari did something extraordinary. He went through all 100 hadith again, this time correcting each one. For each fabricated version, he recited the correct chain of narration, the correct text of the hadith, and exactly how the scholars had mixed them up. He had not only memorized all 100 authentic versions, but had also perfectly memorized the 100 fabricated versions they had presented, kept them distinct in his mind, and could explain precisely where each error occurred. The scholars were stunned. This wasn't just memory. This was a mind operating at a level they had never witnessed. After 16 years of travel, investigation, and verification, al-Bukhari began compiling his masterwork, Al-Jami al-Sahih, the authentic collection, known simply as Sahih al-Bukhari. Here are the staggering numbers. Al-Bukhari examined approximately 600,000 hadith narrations. From this enormous pool, he selected only 7,397 hadith for inclusion in his collection, including repetitions. Without repetitions, around 2,602 unique hadith. Think about that ratio. He examined 600,000 narrations and accepted roughly 7,400, about 1.2%. He rejected more than 98% of what he encountered because it didn't meet his standards of authentication. What were those standards? Al-Bukhari's criteria became the gold standard for Hadith authentication. First, every link in the chain of transmission must be documented. You can't have gaps where we don't know how a narration passed from one generation to the next. Second, each person in the chain must be known for truthfulness, moral integrity, and religious practice. People known for lying, moral corruption, or doctrinal deviation were rejected. Third, it's not enough to be honest, narrators must be accurate. Al-Bukhari investigated whether narrators had strong memories, whether they were careful in transmission, whether they used written notes or relied on memory, whether their narrations were consistent over time. Fourth, Al-Bukhari went beyond earlier scholars by requiring proof that each narrator actually met and learned directly from the previous narrator in the chain. It wasn't enough for them to be contemporaries. There must be evidence of actual contact and transmission. Fifth, the hadith content must not contradict the Quran, must not contradict other well-established hadith, must be coherent and consistent with Islamic principles. Al-Bukhari didn't just apply these criteria casually, he was meticulous to the point of obsession. There are accounts of him praying 2 rak'ahs, units of prayer, before including each hadith in his collection, seeking divine guidance to ensure he was making the right judgment. He organized Sahih al-Bukhari not chronologically but thematically, creating chapters on faith, knowledge, ritual purity, prayer, charity, fasting, pilgrimage, business transactions, marriage, inheritance, criminal law, manners, and more. This made the collection practical. Scholars and judges could easily find relevant hadith for the legal or ethical questions they faced. What al-Bukhari achieved went far beyond compiling a single book. He essentially created, or at least perfected, an entire science, Ilm al-Hadith, the science of hadith criticism. This science developed sophisticated terminology and methods distinguishing authentic from weak, from fabricated narrations, mass transmitted from individual transmission, elevated to the prophet versus stopped at a companion, analysis of hidden defects, and biographical evaluation of narrators. Al-Bukhari's biographical research was particularly groundbreaking. He investigated thousands of narrators, documenting their lives, their teachers, their students, their character, their reliability. This created a vast database of information about early Islamic personalities that proved invaluable, not just for hadith authentication, but for Islamic historiography generally. Modern Western scholars have compared al-Bukhari's method to contemporary historical criticism, noting that he was applying source criticism, biographical analysis, and cross-referencing techniques centuries before similar methods emerged in European scholarship. When Sahih al-Bukhari was completed, the Islamic scholarly community recognized its unprecedented rigor. Within al-Bukhari's lifetime, the book gained acceptance across the Muslim world. Scholars acknowledged that while other authentic hadith existed outside his collection, everything within his collection met the highest standards of authentication. A consensus emerged among Sunni scholars that Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, compiled by al-Bukhari's student Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj, using similar but slightly less stringent criteria, were the 2 most authentic hadith collections in existence. Among these 2, Sahih al-Bukhari was considered slightly more rigorous in its authentication standards. This recognition has endured for over 11 centuries. Today, Sahih al-Bukhari remains the most authoritative hadith collection in Sunni Islam. Scholars estimate that hundreds of millions of Muslims worldwide consider it the most reliable source of prophetic tradition after the Quran itself. But al-Bukhari's influence extended beyond his masterwork. He trained numerous students who became major scholars in their own right. Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj, compiler of Sahih Muslim, was one of his students. His methodological approach influenced all subsequent hadith scholarship. Al-Bukhari also wrote other significant works, including Al-Adab al-Mufrad, a collection focused specifically on ethics and proper behavior, and Al-Tarikh al-Kabir, a massive biographical dictionary of hadith narrators. Al-Bukhari's commitment to truth and scholarly integrity sometimes brought him into conflict with political and religious authorities. In the later years of his life, he became embroiled in a theological controversy in his hometown region. A governor named Khalid ibn Ahmad al-Dhuhli invited al-Bukhari to come to his residence to teach Hadith to his children. Al-Bukhari refused, stating, "I do not go to kings. If you want knowledge, come to the mosque or to my house." This refusal to show special deference to political authority offended the governor. The situation escalated when theological disputes arose. Al-Bukhari held a particular position on the theological question of whether the Quran was created or eternal, a major controversy in 9th century Islamic thought. Local religious authorities who disagreed with his position used the governor's animosity to turn sentiment against him. Al-Bukhari was eventually forced to leave Bukhara. He settled in the village of Khatang, near Samarkand, living with relatives. It was there, in relative isolation, that he died in 870 CE, at the age of 60. The irony is profound. The man who authenticated Islam's most sacred traditions after the Quran, who traveled the entire Islamic world in pursuit of truth, died in exile from his hometown because he refused to compromise his principles for political convenience. In an era drowning in information but starving for truth, al-Bukhari's legacy feels urgently relevant. We live in a time when misinformation spreads faster than fact-checking can catch up. Everyone can publish claims without verification. Emotional resonance often matters more than factual accuracy. Tribal loyalty often determines what people believe rather than evidence, and fake news and alternative facts erode shared understanding of reality. Al-Bukhari faced a remarkably similar crisis over 1,100 years ago. His response wasn't to give up on truth or to accept that everyone has their own truth. Instead, he dedicated his life to developing systematic methods for distinguishing authentic information from fabrication. His methodology offers lessons far beyond Islamic scholarship. Don't just accept claims because they align with your beliefs or because authority figures assert them. Investigate sources, verify chains of transmission, cross-reference information. The reliability of information depends partly on the reliability of those transmitting it. Al-Bukhari investigated narrators' character, memory, biases, and track records. Modern media literacy requires similar evaluation. Al-Bukhari examined 600,000 narrations, but accepted only about 7,400. He understood that truth isn't determined by volume, but by verification. In our age of information overload, this principle is crucial. Despite his genius, al-Bukhari was known for his humility. He recognized that human knowledge is limited, that authentication requires community verification, that even rigorous methods can't achieve absolute certainty about everything. Al-Bukhari could have compromised his standards to produce a larger collection, to please political authorities, to gain wealth and position. He chose scholarly integrity instead, even when it cost him personally. Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari left an indelible mark on Islamic civilization and on the broader history of human knowledge. He didn't just compile a book, he created a science. He didn't just collect traditions, he established standards of authentication that influenced how Muslims understood their religion for over a millennium. Sahih al-Bukhari has been copied, printed, translated, memorized, and studied continuously for 11 centuries. It remains in print today, available in dozens of languages, studied by millions of students, referenced by scholars, taught in universities and madrasas worldwide. But perhaps al-Bukhari's greatest legacy is demonstrating that the pursuit of truth requires both brilliance and humility, both systematic methodology and ethical integrity, both intellectual rigor and spiritual devotion. He showed that preserving authentic knowledge requires more than just writing things down. It requires critical investigation, careful verification, honest acknowledgement of uncertainty, and willingness to reject what cannot be authenticated, no matter how appealing or widespread it might be. In a hadith that al-Bukhari himself authenticated, the Prophet Muhammad said, "Whoever Allah wishes good for, He gives him understanding of the religion." Al-Bukhari dedicated his life to providing that understanding, not through speculation or innovation, but through the painstaking work of authentication and preservation. The boy from Bukhara who went blind and regained his sight, who memorized hundreds of thousands of narrations, who traveled 96,000 kilometers in pursuit of truth, who examined 600,000 hadith and accepted only 7,400. He became the guardian of Islamic memory, ensuring that future generations could access authentic knowledge of their prophets' teachings. That's an indelible mark worth remembering. If this gave you a new perspective on Islamic intellectual history, subscribe to Muslim Biographies. We uncover the forgotten giants whose contributions shaped our world, because history has the answers, if you know where to look.